How is AI changing the landscape of education? As we continue to mold the 21st century learners, we harness the promise of AI. The COVID-19 pandemic is a testament of how AI-powered platforms helped facilitate remote learning and allowed learners to customize the way they learn. From education to governance, AI is undeniably offering limitless opportunities, from science and research to understanding complex problems like traffic. AI has helped the Philippine government improve public services and decision-making strategies, from e-governance to automation of public services to AI-driven advancements integrated into healthcare. AI is bridging the gap so these sectors can propel forward in maximizing the endless possibilities AI has to offer.
Let's go through this. This seems to be everyone's favorite topic, traffic. And so let's see. First, all the work presented here are done in collaboration with my team at NIP. Through the years, they've changed. I haven't really changed that much. And recently, this is our latest picture. Funding was provided by first DOST and NAST, the parts I'm showing in this work, which is the first step that allowed me to collect, data using small sensors. And then Ched Picari came through, and this part actually allowed us two things. One is to engage in collaborative work, which is related to governance, and it's the one where I actually did interact with people from NCPAG, the National College for Public Administration and Governance, and they're the experts in talking to government and say, realize what is your weakness. This is my weakness, it's their strength. So my main collaborator there is Dr. Tiglao, and they're the one who, talk these things through with Pasig City, as well as with General Santos City. And so the figures, the computation, we're heavily involved in that, creating the sensors, sure, discussing how it should work. There's simply a huge amount of information one needs to know before getting into these things as well. Throughout this talk, maybe later on we can discuss things further. As well as the Ched Picari project actually allowed us to also build our computational platform. We called it a reconfigurable cluster. Essentially, it allowed us to remove things, add things. Into the cluster, it runs 24/7, 365. It so happened during the pandemic, it's critical in how we were able to work. Everyone was doing remote, we were happy to do so. We've created open source toolkits for traffic modeling here, built upon OpenStreetMap, OSMNX, and the open traffic models that was actually done in collaboration with, the open traffic models was done in Berkeley. We created a Python shim for it. And we've used it, for example, to create something like this, where we compute the usual stuff when you think of traffic, static routing algorithms, similar to what Waze would give you. But that's not actually the, and actually we even tried to do educational engagements. We talked with DOTR, gave actually a seminar on what's good data versus bad data. It was entitled, is this data set, good data versus bad data, is this data set useful? It was a mini workshop on transport data exploration and visualization using Python. And we had it at the DOTR office. They provided a venue. We went there to essentially teach. But today, I want to try to, entice you with this question. Why do we want to solve the traffic problem? And actually, the best answer is something I found, just the other day. Mayor Joy, who isn't here, actually mentioned it. It's because we want a livable city. So I actually want to pause here a bit because this is not the preaching to the choir stuff. Because it says we have to disincentivize people from bringing their cars into the city. And it's like, quiet in the room. Everyone probably here came in a car. So, but let me start here. This is actually one of the places I usually go to. This is the backyard of NIP. You say, a picture can launch 1,000 questions. So I'm actually going to start with a few. Okay? This is the view from the footbridge, pedestrian footbridge. along Katipunan. There's a classic question. Okay, when you say, let's talk about traffic. If you talk about this with MMDA, they'll start asking you, how fast can we move? And so we've done this stuff. We did things like, let's extract trip statistics from both active vehicle location or GPS tracks, at the same time as trying to use passive RFID detection. Because why do you want passive RFID detection? It's the kind of stuff you want to put. Your RFID sticker, for example, is something that's easily, scattered all over. You can put it on tricycles or any form of vehicle, pwede kang sa kariton, okay? And all you need is to start distributing transceivers to figure out what are the things that pass through a certain area, okay? And so the idea, therefore, is what movement can we extrapolate from such RFID detection data? This time it was done in 4 detectors deployed in General Santos City. So things like dwell time. How long is the tag within a certain range? So for example, are the tricycles waiting? Or sometimes in some of the cases we found, the issue was some guy was parked there and his RFID tag was actually getting triggered. And things like average speed, the total distance over time. So things like average speed, within the time period, and then you can compare it with GPS tracks and see how does it look like if you look at just the average versus what it looks like if you have active tracking all the time, and therefore you can get instantaneous speed. And you will see here, so there are actually 2 different things, because the one is solely for Jeeps, and you can actually see where you could possibly have bottlenecks, where there are a lot of Jeeps stopped for prolonged periods. And so you can start also understanding where are the key stops. If you want to start putting actual stops, where should they be? But let's move on and say, okay, let me ask another question from this photo. And one of the things is, when do U-turns stop working? Okay. And U-turns is actually one of the first things that when I got back from my postdoc is the first thing that I did, because we were the lab was on the 4th floor of NIP, and we could actually see a U-turn slot. And so it's like, okay, look here, there's a U-turn slot. Look that way, that's a straight line. And so it's like, okay, we have a control, we have a U-turn, let's run this. But later on, so that kept going, but later on, it's like, the next question was, why is it always the traffic is jammed near UP Town Center? And that triggered the question, wait, that's a paired U-turn. And it's always a perennial question, is where should they put the U-turn slot? Where should the next one be? And say, let's close that, open the one in Miriam and all that. And say, well, look at it this way. Paired U-turns, whatever you do, simply lengthens the space for queuing. It's going to stop working when you reach that queue length, and it's going to lock up. And when you do, you have this humongous traffic jam, and you say, okay, I'm here forever. And so this would suddenly happen. The moment you lock it up, you're going to have to unclog it, and you're going to get road rage there. So now we're getting a sense that traffic volume is crucial. And MMDA keeps saying this, mataas po yung traffic volume. And it is actually true. This is the fundamental diagram of traffic. On the x-axis, you can actually see road density, where essentially what that means is, as you increase it, more cars are being fitted in the same road space. And on the y-axis is the throughput, or what gets through. So on the side where you get this line, you get free flow. So more cars in, more would go out. But at some point, they start interacting, and you actually have this drop. And that's where you start feeling, hey, it's getting congested. And that's when, and it just keeps going down with increasing traffic volume. So essentially, the answer is, if you want to solve traffic, you really need to decrease this density. There's no going around it. And here I can actually discuss, the various phases, the things you feel, what does it look like when you have free flow, when you have your congested stop-and-go traffic, or sometimes when you see platooning, wherein you get jammed, unjammed, and then keep going. From the perspective of someone on the vehicle, this looks like free flow. You get the travel at the maximum speed, and then as it gets congested, and it starts just dropping down. And I always tell my students, this is actually something you know quite well. This is the difference between leaving your home at 6:30 a.m. versus leaving it at 6:35 a.m. and then suddenly you're totally late, not just by 5 minutes, but by 30 minutes. So again, the only real solution is to lower the number of vehicles. And that means to move the same number of people, you need more mass transit. But then how do you induce transport mode change? And so here, what comes in is, what is it actually like when you ride a bus? And in this particular instance, we have a Pasig City bus where GPS tracks were obtained that had both location and speed. Option one is I can draw this map where you can see where the speed is low in red, where the speed is relatively higher in green. But I can also give you another option. How does it feel? And pace is what it feels like. The typical walking pace is around 12 minutes per kilometer. And so if I start plotting how often you feel a certain pace, you're going to see that if I mark where the 12-kilometer line is, you'll see that there's actually places where you really do feel like we're stuck here. And so you have to answer, can we do better on that instance? And now let's look at other things that's happening on the road. So, for example, we know waiting and walking have distinctly different purpose and speed signatures. And sometimes you must ask, how much space should you allot for either or both? Here, what we've done is use CCTV video feeds and applied machine learning, actually OpenVINO, to identify pedestrian tracks. So essentially you find all the persons in this video, track it to the next line, track the next line. And so you're tracking how people move. And when you do so, you can actually plot what's the relative acceleration versus relative velocity for each of those tracks. And you would have a sense, if you show the histogram of all that, what do places look like? So for example, what does the corner of EDSA and Aurora would look like? Versus what does it look like for the corner of Katipunan and CP Garcia, or for this matter, this looks like Quezon City Hall. So waiting is at the lower left corner at 0, 0, and it's a nice walk when you can actually have 0 acceleration and a constant speed. Any other change in acceleration means you're actually getting pissed off because you keep moving around and stopping and going. But moving forward, we actually would want to avoid using CCTV feeds because there's some privacy issues with that. And you kind of want to do edge inference. That is, you want privacy-respecting algorithms. Data processing is done immediately at the detection level, and every other detail that would de-anonymize the system would be thrown out. And that's actually what you want to do. You want to detect, process, and send only minimal info. And then there's still open questions, to what extent do Philippine sidewalk designs disable walking? And in fact, how should they be designed? And this is actually beyond my expertise, but it's something you can observe from the photo. So let's look at something we can't even see in the photo. What about the commuter experience? What about that guy in there? So we can actually describe the end-to-end commuting experience if we use something like your cell phone, in fact, and a separate device to do the measurement, where you can turn acceleration, temperature, and relative humidity data into a comfort index score. So in this particular instance, on the top row, you see the raw data. But if we do some combination of these variables, we can create an index, and we can set a level that say, okay, you go below that index, I am uncomfortable. And this is something you can see, right? When you go into an air-conditioned area, you go out, you go walk. You would see things like, what's happening there? Do you have a poor walking surface? Do you frequently avoid obstacles? Or is it just really hot and humid? So these are the things that one would know. And one could, at the same time, figure out what's happening there and correlate how things are. So using wearable sensors actually also get you a personalized view of walking. So here, for example, again, favorite backyard, UP Town Center and NIP, The task is simple, just cross the road. And you say, yes, that's simple, but there's no crossroad there. You have to cross using the pedestrian walkway. And so we can actually track both the distance. The distance you could just use Google Street Map. But then we can also check what does the temperature and relative humidity give you, and in turn you could get the heat index. And it's like coming out from the mall at 3:23 and walking to my office. I get there in 3:36, so 13 minutes just to cross the street, essentially. And I actually reach a point where the heat index says danger. And so it's like, you are not making it comfortable for me. You are disincentivizing walking. And that's a problem, because if you disincentivize walking, you're incentivizing another mode of transport, most likely driving a car or getting a Grab. And so the bottom line is we can describe situations through measurements. As an aside, making data-driven models actually has its own set of challenges. You can have data that's not available, not machine-readable. Things like maps are in PDF format, routes as shapes rather than actual routes, or not useful. You have tons of data, but it's obfuscated, so it's not usable. In other words, when you have data, you should ask, is it fair? Is it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? So, okay, here's the part where it gets a bit tricky. And it's the part where there's actually you realize there's a lot of open research avenues, because it's not really just about political will. It's about motives and incentives, or disincentives for that matter. So for example, I asked, do we actually incentivize car use? And again, from our backyard. So the plan was to widen the street, okay? And this was a quote, an exact quote. Villar said that the 720 linear meters road project will help alleviate perennial traffic problem in the area, especially during rush hour. Except it had a major pitfall. It's going to, one, create induced demand. If you build it, they will come. But there was a more important unintended consequence. It kind of disincentivized walking because the way it was constructed. So here on the left in 2017, you can actually see the actual sidewalk at our corner. And in 2022, after that was done, it was extremely narrowed down. And says, it signals you are not the priority. And exactly, but how did it happen? So again, it was a question of motives. So a motivation was actually expand the road. And so when they started building it, it's like, okay, how it happened. So here on the left is how it started happening. It's like, hey, the sidewalk's gonna be widened. And on the bottom, it's actually just another view. And you start seeing, oh wait, what's that small thing that they're trying to build there? And so as they finish, you realize they actually didn't build a wide sidewalk. That was the road. And the eventual sidewalk was really that small piece that was remaining because they had to put up the wall, the road, and it's like C equals B minus A. And so that was on the bottom right what you had left. So just when you thought things were getting better, it was a matter of priorities. So here, one more thing. It's like, okay, you should wish for wide and flat sidewalks. But actually, it's not exactly true. You should actually ask for safe ones. So things like the ones that are not slippery at all times, not where you fear you're going to get bitten or you have to go uphill like the footbridge. But here's the thing. So all these things, there's a good news behind. There's a silver lining. If we know that there's a problem, it means we can look for ways to measure them and find them. So again, there are many open research areas that actually require a lot of interdisciplinary work, from motivations, incentives, disincentives, institutional memory that would make these things happen, the design and unintended consequences, and a bunch of other things. So, but in the end, we just have to remember, we have to keep asking the right questions. We can measure the effectiveness of proposed solutions, and we need to have a livable city. Thank you.